These are the lying liars who lied when they said they loved you. A fictionalized, semi-autobiographical novel and podcast by B-Floor. Names have been changed to protect anyone who might be innocent. Nobody is reliable, and everyone will lie to you. These are the lies I told myself, and the lies I was told by the liars who knocked on my door.
Before Tommy was Tommy to me, he was a rumor in other people's mouths. And because he was a rumor, seeing him standing on a street corner just off the interstate, locking eyes with me and inviting himself along to my day, did not seem unusual. It had been, in fact, my goal when I had taken a hard right from the off-ramp into a parking lot of a storage lot, rather than heading straight forward to the meaningless, tasteless incarceration of my home. Tommy was flying a sign that said, "Anything helps," and I was anything. I have not yet put the pieces together that this was that Tommy, and was more enamored by his Aryan perfection and confidence than by the reputation I would attach to his name later. I dreamed of men that looked like him since I was a teen, not because of anything Aryan, but the well-muscled body and the strong jaw and the cornfield blonde hair and the blue eyes. I was so plain, so mid, so average in a car headed to my comfortable home to smoke dope, and he was so exceptional and begging for what I had to give. He had locked eyes on me as I pulled to light in my beat-up wagon, and he nodded slightly, just enough that I would notice if I played this game, enough to signal a hello and a mutually agreed-upon destination, but not enough to clock it as inappropriate if I spoke a different language. I signaled back with just my jawline and turned on my blinker dutifully, and he jogged over at the next break in traffic to the same lot. "Hey man, do I know you?" I said innocently enough, trying to perform familiarity of social circle before getting to business, though something about him was familiar. One drug user clocking another, I figured. "Hey man, nah. You party?" I appreciated the cut in the bullshit. The scene threatened to leave me a target for either the police or dangerous fellow citizens, like Tommy. He was taller than me and built wider up top than below, denoting musculature and strength. I was more wide below, though in one of my skinny years, but a fat kid is always a fat kid, especially next to the jock who stood bent over into my passenger window. I could escape by pressing the gas pedal as hard as possible and jumping the low curb to the main street, but I'd probably drag my blonde accomplice with me. I smiled instead, welcoming him and flirting heavily. "Absolutely, hop in. I live just half a mile up." "My name's Tommy," he said, tapping twice on the window frame, stuttering the first syllable, which I figured was a tell for inauthenticity. Fine. We have our secrets. He wasn't comfortable with a real name yet. I decided then I would overwhelm him with authenticity so that he would be comfortable with me. Comfortable enough, I thought, to take off his clothes, I hoped. I gave him my name with that leering twang that men get when they know they're acting a tad predatory. I hated the sound of my voice right then, but Tommy ignored it seemingly and bounced into the passenger seat of my car with practiced familiarity. "Seriously, though, have we met before? You seem—" "Oh, fuck," I realized. "You're Tommy." I modulated my voice again, away from the accusation that was insinuated in his name and into something that wouldn't sound like something horrible. "We run in the same circles. I've heard really good things about you." Had I, though? I don't remember. "Oh, God, we ain't got to do all that you know him and I know her bullshit, do we? Can we just know each other at first, before everyone else knows I got in your car?" My heart melted a little. Of course he would be tired of the spotlight. Silly me. "No, we absolutely can," I smiled warmly. "I would like that. I just wanted to connect why you seemed familiar. It would have bugged me." And it would have, and still was, but not as acutely. Tommy nodded and smiled, having won the first compromise of our acquaintance, which seemed to give him wide authority to take control. I didn't mind. I liked that he knew what he needed without trying to cover it up in niceties. For example, Tommy said, "You got $10? I just got to get some shit from my guy," rather than bemoaning his inability to buy shit for himself while subtly hinting he only needed a single bill to make something happen. I reassured him that I had plenty of party, that's gay-coded for dope, and Tommy used the ancient term Tina also, which almost certainly screamed a fellow queer Mexican American. But he shut me down and continued confidently with, "I get better shit from my guy." The sureness of his statements was preferred over the more typical performative uncertainty about who to call for more. Tommy knew what he wanted and where to get it. My heart pitter-pattered at his swagger and jumped into the ring where my dick had previously been alone against his magnetism. My brain, though, has not clocked in for the day and was also not answering the phone. But that was not uncommon and had not noticeably been a problem before I told myself every time it seemed like it was going to be a problem. Tommy gesticulated directions. "Just pull up to the next light and take a left and then a right and pull into the paint store lot, and he lives on the other side of the parking lot." See, his plug was even on the way home. Less than 5 minutes after we had first made eye contact, I was capitulating to his demands and doing as I was told. Tommy had $15 in hand for me. My wallet produced a 10 and a 5, and I had given both to demonstrate absolute magnanimity, to convince him that I was a nice guy, and there was good reason for him to come back and not disappear with my money. He shut the door carefully in the parking lot of the paint store, with his feet already pointing towards a trap house barely visible through a break in the fence. But his hands remained on the door, and he turned back to lock eyes again, to silently acknowledge my fears that he would abandon me before he scampered for his magic dope. Tommy had a perfect, white, toothy, gee willikers, Mr. smile, reminiscent of a 1950s sitcom on his face. "Hey, thanks, man. I'll be back in 10 minutes. He leaned into the car conspiratorially. "If it gets hot over here, or the cops start circling, there's a gas station around the corner. Bounce and meet me there." I nodded. "Oh yeah, the whatever that is around the corner. They just built it. I need gas anyways. Why don't I just head over? I'll get you a drink." I hated waiting in parking lots in a car alone with the engine running. For reasons. A gas station was different. At some point, everybody in their life made their way to the gas station alone with the car and engine running for apparent but probably illegal reason, while police and everyday citizens would move obliviously, you hoped, around you in all directions. Gas stations were the great equalizers of the modern world because everything everyone did looked a little suspicious, because no gatekeeping and a lack of loitering laws made them equally accessible to anybody and everybody. "Perfect. I like cherry Pepsi. Fountain, please." He tapped the window of the passenger side door twice again before he bolted off, but was shouting as he moved away. "I got you. I'll be there in 15. Give me 20 at the most." Tommy's voice was already in the distance before he got it all out. I put the car back into drive, felt it clunk back into gear, and I rolled slowly to the gas station around the corner, cursing the city's lack of road maintenance the whole way and thankful for the clean newness of this gas station. 20 minutes later, my gas tank as full as my meager bank account would allow, there was no sign of Tommy. 30 minutes passed. I was parked in a spot alongside the convenience store in clear sight of the paint store's parking lot. I debated heading that way, but I knew better than to go knock on a trap house door, and, with my luck, he would show up the minute I decided to look for him. At 40 minutes, however, with his cherry Pepsi and my Mountain Dew in the drink holders sweating audibly in the heat, I knew Tommy wouldn't return. If I was being honest, I knew around minute 5 after he left that Tommy wouldn't come back. It had been Kenneth who brag-warned me about the blonde boy's disappearing act. Kenneth, who was so good-looking, even my father asked what he was doing hanging out with me. So good-looking, I had once been referred to as the rich one, socially, as a way of explaining the Grand Canyon size difference in our appearance when the two of us arrived together. I was a preferred Kenneth friend because I could administer dope via needle into his beautifully oversized, muscly arms, whose veins had become firm rivers of scar tissue after years of injecting by people who did not know the first thing about injecting, but still did so daily on themselves and everyone else. He told me about Tommy while I was busy, running my finger up and down his bicep and tricep and calf and neck looking for a vein, already having a spot I was confident about, but enjoying the slow, purposeful molestation of the hunt. I wasn't paying attention to what he was talking about. We didn't fuck, Kenneth said years ago, while I spent an unnecessary amount of time pressing into his upper bicep, muttering, "Sinew or vein, sinew of vein, definitely sinew," before running my finger along his skin to his shoulder and repeating, "The guy took my $10, promised me he'd be right back, but didn't show up for 3 days. I mean, it's only $10, but still." "Mm-hmm. Aren't you pissed?" I said. I moved my focus to the spot on the outer part of his tricep, way up near where his arm meets the shoulder, to the spot I had found a pipeline early on. I decided, at the mention of fucking, that I was ready to stop rubbing and start getting rubbed. "Don't move," I hissed. Kenneth stopped everything. While I knew this was all transactional, and the naked time after the shot was payment for the high, I enjoyed it, and the small win of seeing blood in the plunger was a hot smack of dopamine to my own self-worth. I was getting off on my usefulness to a pretty boy. This is why he needs me, I knew. This is what he comes for. This is why he'll come back. The relationship was uncomplicated and set up perfectly for both of us. I would, if asked, let Kenneth move in and dominate every aspect of my life. But that was out of the question. There already was a Mr. Kenneth, some bitchy twink who needed more psych pills than mankind offered from the sound of it. I threaded the needled, and the blood pulled back easily, like it had been waiting to be discovered. "Tell me if it burns," I said offhanded, after I had already pushed in half the dope. Then I was done and holding my finger over the site, and Kenneth was pulling away with a hand over his head and dancing the dance of a man successfully injected and coughing the rush of dragon's breath. "We fucked 3 days later," he said breathlessly, finishing his story. "I didn't think he was a bottom, but there he was, ass up begging for it, and so I gave it to him." I slammed my own needled in while he spoke, barely listening, excited as the rush hit me, and I went for my belt buckle. Kenneth put his hand on my shoulder. "Oh, I can't stick around today. The boyfriend wants me back. Sorry. I'll hit you up later." And Kenneth was gone. And I was still on the floor where I had shot him, and then me coughing and feeling the dragon build and breathe out in one hot breath from my lungs, coloring the rest of my day not with the story about Tommy's disappearance, but with my own absurd desires and disappointment about men generally. An hour had passed, and the memory filled me with dual shame. Once from that day, and once from today. It had been almost an hour. I felt foolish, sitting in the parking lot of the gas station. I don't think I would have done anything differently had I remembered Kenneth's story, except I might have left half an hour ago. I tried to convince myself I would have left sooner, but failed to believe it. It was a year or more later, and I reached out to Tommy first, this time, finding his name and number in cyberspace like we used to find hookers on bathroom walls. That's my confession, and it was my first sin. It was a lie I told myself for years later. Fate had arranged him in my path, that I was a passive victim of beauty and coincidence, and I was just a guy who needed a massage and accidentally found a disaster that I mistook for just another man. I knew Tommy was around, had been acutely aware of his position within the social matrix of my life ever since that afternoon in the gas station turned into a deep dive to find him in cyberspace. A hunt which turned up nothing but several conversations with empty social media accounts I later deleted for my misery. I learned later that Tommy had been sort of circling my geography, aligning himself with the dealer up the street that was my own plug's plug, Georgie. I was not allowed to go to Georgie, despite our proximity, because you can't just skip the line like that in this world's hierarchy. But Tommy knew Georgie. The two were sort of dating, according to Georgie, but it was complicated, and as Tommy asserted to anyone who listened, Tommy was straight, so they were just close friends. The best, even. I discovered Tommy's proximity on accident through Redneck, my dealer and somewhat fuck buddy, but I could not just go up to find the blonde boy, not because I was principled, but because I had learned the importance of the social hierarchy as everyone who lived in this world did, either by getting too close and being burnt for the trying, or by sheer institutional memory of taboos where no one could tell you their origin. I knew I could not go see a well-known dealer a scant 2 blocks from my door because I had never been walked up and introduced. I had never been gifted an audience, and did not even know what Georgie looked like. It was impossible for me to walk up to his house, my neighbor, to even say hello, which is the kind of logic that makes sense at the time and is shredded in hindsight when the expense and the burden of going elsewhere for my dope stopped making sense. And yet still, I did not even know what Georgie looked like, and I never knocked on his door. I interacted instead with his redneck and his brother, who were regulars here and regulars there. I was their customer, or his brothers when necessity and chance aligned, and I might have even called them my friends at some point. But I was not Georgie's customer, and I stayed in my lane. But online, there was no indication Tommy was tied to anyone romantically or otherwise across a dozen or so identical social media accounts, a proliferation likely the result of forgotten passwords and phones traded in for a dose. Tommy was single, but straight to the world, it seemed, or single enough that any relationship was not important enough to transmit from one account to another, and single enough that the advertisement on one of his accounts felt like a gift from God. That asshole. Massage available, $50. Phone number. My regular masseuse had fired me. I was still bougie enough to have a masseuse at that point in my life, a carryover from a life of plenty and excess that I still clung to desperately. $50 had been his price too, $50 for the massage, and the fuck was free. The arrangement had persisted for several years, and I was giving enough that the $50 was often doubled out of gratitude, once tripled for a holiday, and he had always been available. But once I hit an obstacle and $50 became a struggle, the willingness and eagerness began to dwindle with my account, and a weekly thing became barely monthly, and then, having done him a personal favor and offered a free session in return, ended abruptly when I went to cash in the gift and had nothing extra to give. I was unfucked and fired in the same session, and I realized then what a bargain I had been paying all along. Tommy's $50 massage could not have come at a better time. Tommy was attractive, seemed open-minded, part of the community, and did I mention he was attractive? I'm not sure if I ever wondered about his credentials. I called the number listed, left a voicemail. I called the next day and left another voicemail, all polite, not rushing, nothing too needy or thirsty. I was professional. I texted once on day 3, then again, at first carefully, then with greater familiarity, clustered at first until days of silence sank in and my attempts to contact him went unanswered. I was pleading a non-entity to perform a service at a discount. I'm not sure I would have answered myself. Then, weeks later, I was outside smoking, performing my usual ritual of pretending I could breathe my way into a better life. Tommy walked by casually, as if fate and circumstance had dropped him on my block, barefoot, with nothing else to do but shoot the shit with every needy homosexual out for a smoke. Tommy's posture was too straight for a man with nothing, and he walked on the balls of his feet. He was dirtier than I remembered him, an actual smudge on his face of dirt that he ascribed to napping in the park up the street, as if, of course, that's the most normal thing in the world. Tommy looked dangerous, half bored, half predatory, and very aware of what his looks and charm could get him. He didn't look at me like a person, he looked at me like a house. I was land to grab and extract necessities from, and I fell into that role without thinking and offered him a cigarette. It was the oldest language I knew, and he returned in the same dialect. "You smoke?" I asked, already holding it out. "Yeah." He took it with dirty fingers like I owed it to him. I offered my lighter, which he took and pocketed without hesitation after he had lit his own. I made a note to smoke a second to acquire the lighter back naturally without embarrassing him for the obvious error. It would be easier to say, "Oh, hey, that's my lighter. What a silly mistake," than to call him out on it now. We stood there a minute. "Want to come in?" I asked, and I made it sound casual and not like I had been orbiting him digitally for weeks in the hopes that he would recognize me. I was cool and calm, and this was totally normal. I asked everyone inside, and my apartment door was famously leaky in the filtration of external forces into my space. Nothing unusual here. Tommy shrugged and started toward the gate ahead of me. I was dumbfounded and stubbing out my cigarette, and he was 5 steps ahead and flicking his into the bushes. I went to grab his or correct him, but he was already at the wooden gate impatiently awaiting me to join him, so I skip-stepped my way up the walkway to unlatch the gate and pull it aside to let him. It wasn't a romantic beginning, but I wasn't one for romance in the traditional sense. Tommy started coming around, but not for massages, as I'd intended. Tommy moved himself into the general atmosphere of my living space daily and flirted with just enough candor and grace to feel a natural part of the atmosphere. My apartment fit him like an old sweatshirt, stained and stretched at the neck, and comfortably in a way only something 1 or 2 sizes too big could be. His naturalness was welcome and deceptive. I knew there had always been a hole there, and he fit it well enough even if there were gaps around parts of him, and in other sections he barely squeezed through. Tommy plugged a hole that I greased up in expectation that he wouldn't fit, and we both spent too much time commenting on how well he did to comment on the discrepancy. Maybe he noticed too and ignored it like I did. Who cares? He was better looking by twice as much as any other man showing me attention, and I had sacrificed much larger payments for far fewer moments of a man's attention. He served as a useful and more reliable bridge to Georgie for dope than Redneck, who took the replacement well, so long as he could still come and get high off my dime regularly. Kami left with my money and returned every time, except for the once or twice he didn't, but those were easily dispensable to the general chaos of his daily life rather than anything malintended. Kami was certainly more reliable than Redneck. And then there was the regularity of him. Every day, a frequency that makes sense now in hindsight due to his astronomical need for resources and my life of relative excess that must have felt hedonistic, a frequency that I saw as a affectionate, non-predatorial inseparability. Tommy was there. If it might have been a few moments or a few hours, but like clockwork, he was soon a daily part of my routine. Well, him and David. David was the first chaperone, and would have been, to a less besotted and thirsty fag, the first misprint in the game of house Tommy was building. Around David, out of respect for his unsullied and almost puritanical time as a fentanyl addict who claimed no knowledge of or direct experience with such sexual deviancy as homosexuality, I self-censored and kept my hands from wandering to Tommy. David was Tommy's brother on the streets, a newbie to this world, and whose honor and innocence, I believed, I helped protect. I took the honorific of brother literally, because they told me they were brothers, separately, without cue, and with identical conviction. I created boundaries and demonstrated respect for their familial unity, even though they looked nothing alike, and my thirst for Tommy was becoming increasingly unmanageable. And then suddenly, Kami and I were a couple, and David was there too. "I thought we were dating," Tommy said with rolled eyes as I commented on some trick I had planned for later in the day. I had no reason not to. Tommy did not seem overtly eager to pursue anything physical, and David's continual presence precluded anything from occurring naturally, even despite the occasional wrestling match Tommy subjected me to, where he stripped to his underwear, if he wore any at all, and I fully dressed. Something should have happened by now if it was going to, and no answer is an answer, even if the question remains unasked. So Tommy's assertion about our relationship status stopped me for only a second. I pleaded into the air of my office where Tommy was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees. David was cross-legged on the floor beside him. "But we haven't even kissed," was my best response, but it was enough to make him stumble verbally with his mouth formed into a disbelieving "oh," while David raised both his eyebrows and developed a sudden urgency to leave. I have not had many relationships in my life and had rarely been asked out, but I felt that moment had been handled incorrectly by everyone. I felt my head swim, and I felt my mouth go dry in a way that felt like a craving to smoke something. Dope, a cigarette, pole, anything would do go occupy the muscles of inhalation and respiration so that my heart wouldn't interpret my humiliation and anger with sadness and produce tears I felt coalescing in the corners of my eyes. "I'm going to run up to the store," David offered, and moved acutely and directly toward the front door before Tommy could regain his feet. The silence went on a breathless moment too long, while David silently cursed a need to grab cigarettes, a lighter, and his wallet before he escaped. I could almost hear his thoughts broadcasted by the nervous look on his face, his head darting quickly around the room while he prayed in his head for his hands and feet to move faster before real trouble emerged. I broke the silence, interrupting David's outward progression briefly. He recovered and just picked up his bag rather than dive further as I spoke. Between David's sudden exit and my aggressive, progressive demands for escalation beyond fantasies and the role play of sexual submission through wrestling, Tommy looked for a flickering moment off balance. I sat down with a sudden sense of, I wasn't sure what to label it, but it felt familiar and achingly absent in the past few months. I had spoken up, and it felt like I was, "You're right." Tommy had been watching my own expression even as his dropped into near panic and froze at the point at which the smallest toe could take a grasp of the slope. "He is kind of a creep, isn't he? No wonder you don't take this seriously. I am such an idiot." The atmosphere felt like 76 trombones might come bursting through the door as he spoke. His tone wavered now between an earnest authenticity I did not recognize and the disingenuous bullshit I did. "Why do I let him come? You know he's got nowhere else to go." "He could go spend time with his wife?" I stepped hesitantly towards a ledge, towards the sunlight, grabbing a wheel in front of me to direct the conversation for something I wanted. For Tommy. I blushed openly as I thought it. Am I 12? "I just want a boyfriend" sounded saccharine, unreal, and the kind of juvenile idiocy a teenage girl tells herself. Tommy wants to be my boyfriend. I felt heat upon heat building in my cheeks, but I was on surer ground. "Why doesn't he go there? Why does he always need to be out hustling and running the streets with you? Like, man and woman. God brought them together or something, right? He's got a fucking wife and she lives somewhere. There are other people, abandos, fields, park benches. Why here, with us, if we're together? We haven't kissed." I threw my hands up dramatically. I was winning, and I knew I was winning by my increasingly erratic gesticulation. Tommy coughed. "That's not really our place to say, and I'm sure, hasn't he told you about her? Mean bitch, bedbound, demanding, has her mother and sisters over all the time to abuse him, won't let him touch her." Tommy leaned in too close enough to smell the mixture of this morning's Krispy Kreme donuts found in the trash, and the trash itself, heavy and thick and somehow enticing in the back of his throat, spewed out on his breath seductively. "I bought him a girl last week. Poor pencil-dick bastard was talking about going gay, he was so thirsty." We both laughed at the absurdity. His laugh was manufactured, and mine devoid of humor. David's pencil dick was well known despite his celibate assertions. He was even going to say he'd let you blow him, and I told him he could do better. I laughed even less, and listened tightly to the timbre and the rising and falling pitch of his oversized, toothy laugh for anything that sounded like, implied, or lived in the same galaxy as a negation. I was holding my breath for him to say, "Just kidding," when I told him, "Don't be stupid. Even I barely want to touch you, and we're dating." Which brings me to my point. We should find more time together without him. And I appreciate you taking time because you know how disgusting I find the whole idea, but he grabbed my hand and put it on his crotch, which had swollen admirably. I really want to try because I care about you. In the next 10 minutes before David returned with M&Ms and a Mountain Dew, Tommy and I had our first physical encounter. It was not what I had expected, but I was trying to understand where my expectations were hurting me more than the reality. And the reality was that a straight guy jerking off on my face with no actual physical contact in 5 minutes or less was a completely normal thing to do. Or so Tommy said. And I believed Tommy, my boyfriend.